It's easy to fall in love with your ideas, especially when they're still floating around inside your head. But they're safe, cocooned inside your thoughts, beautiful and amorphous, and for all intents and purposes, not real. Once your ideas come out on paper, they are finite, and seldom do they achieve the high standards that you had for them when they were still conceptual. So, there are two things here. Don't be too precious with your ideas, and don't keep them inside your head. Get them out. This is a new sketchbook of mine. It's actually like a preliminary sketchbook for my world building sketchbook. And it's just, I needed a space that was totally free, where I didn't feel like things had to be precise or good, because I find that I do get too precious with my ideas. I have a tendency to lean too heavily on making something good. And when you're trying to world build, you just can't do that. If you're writing, you can't do that either. You have to experiment and you have to try things and know that they won't work out. So, of course, I started with some illustrations just to get something kind of here. But you can see immediately I had to start working on this bell tower that's in the middle of the city. And so far I've done a couple renditions of what I think the central bell will look like, or what the top of it or the silhouette of the tower will look like. But I'm not happy with any of those yet. So that's what we're going to dive into at the beginning of this session, and we'll kind of see how far we get. I'm going to start working with some different ideas on how this might come out, what this might look like. So I don't know which medium is going to work best for me in this regard, and I'm just going to experiment with some and see. But the first point that I had is kind of the idea that you can't be too precious with your ideas. If you have something in your head, something that you want to world build, something that you want to bring to fruition, especially if it's an idea that you've played with for a long time, you can really feel like if that first drawing doesn't achieve what you're desiring, if it doesn't come out right, then it feels like you've failed. And maybe you actually have, but it doesn't particularly matter. And that's hard to get over. I find it difficult to have this thing that you've poured so much thought into turn out poorly. And the weird thing is, and I ran into this a lot when I was teaching. I ran into it personally first, and then had to kind of do some really heavy lifting and, looking into some of the literature from how art education works, childhood psychology, for how our brains just function. And the weirdness that I'm referring to is the disconnect that happens between an idea in your brain and then actually putting it down onto paper. And most of us, if not all of us, have experienced this in some way. This disconnect. You have something that you see in your mind and it's beautiful and precise and it makes so much sense. And then as you start putting it down onto paper, you realize you can't do that. For most of us, I think we get to a moment really quickly where we just feel like our skills have let us down. And sometimes that is the case for sure. But I feel like more often than it's our skills that let us down, it's actually that what we thought we had imagined in our brains and understood conceptually, we didn't actually understand all that well. So before I go on with the talk, I'm just going to be laying down a whole bunch of random shapes here. In some of them, there's thought. In some of them, there's not. These are for the silhouette of the tower. These are going to be for the bell itself. And I'm basically going to... This is something that I do when I'm trying to figure out like what something should look like. I'll start with a design that I think is close to what I want, and then I will iterate on it. And probably 95% of these are going to be crap. These are going to be things that I don't use, and that's fine. The nice part is that, that 1% of them I will use for the actual intended purpose, and then some of them will actually find their way in other places. So just so you know kind of how I'm working, what I'm up to here. I would encourage you to do the same thing, and let me know in the comments below what you're working on for your world building right now, hopefully while you're watching this. And my goal is to essentially come up with the design of this tower and then the bell at the top. Specifically because in the stuff I'm writing right now, my characters have just dealt with this tower. And it will help me as I go through editing and as I try to make sure I structure things correctly to understand what it actually looks like. So The basics is this was a giant tower that was evidently in the middle of this town and city before the city itself was built, and it's just had some wooden structures built around it over time, almost to hide its existence, but also to preserve it. So I love ancient technology, I love ancient civilization stuff, and this is certainly a portion of that. So let's go back then to the idea I was talking about prior, assuming that I can remember well enough to get there. I think that it's yes, I remember where I was. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. So our ideas in our mind are not particularly real. When you have conceived of an idea for something, generally, unless you've physically brought it into reality, it is composed almost entirely of emotion. And you can't differentiate that naturally in your mind. At least most of us can't. For most of us, it just feels like you understand something. So if you have a character you devised, if you have a city that you've, talked about in a story that you've written, take a moment and try to conjure that image in your mind. And as you're doing that, try to focus on really specific details. So if you've got a character, the baseline things are pretty easy. Like, what color is their hair? What are they wearing? But do they have a belt? If they have a belt, what do the belt buckles look like? Are they circular? Are they square? What color are they? What material were they made from? Is their hair thinning at all? What size is their nose? Where does it come out? Do they have long eyelashes, or are they thinning in places? Do they have any freckles? And you can follow these kinds of trains of thought pretty deep. I mean, the things that I hit on right there are pretty surface level, but if you start putting any amount of time into actually pulling apart all of the pieces of that design in your mind, you will often find that far less of it is actually conceived. And this is because our ideas in our mind are often comprised less of detail and more of emotion. Our emotions tend to fill in the gaps. You can find this often if you go back in your head and try to remember something that happened a long time ago, perhaps an event or, a movie. And there will often be very exciting pieces of that. But can you actually conjure all of what happened there? And most of us simply cannot. And that's because our brains are built to simplify things. We would be overwhelmed often if we all had photographic memories. In fact, there's often a lot of issues that come with photographic memories because the human brain is supposed to simplify things. Think of it like a computer zipping files together so that it can conserve space. So our brains tend to not hold on to every detail. And this happens in our world building too. So if you've ever tried to get down a character design or get down the design of a weapon or a city or something and been utterly disappointed by how inaccurate it is compared to the image you saw in your mind, give yourself a little bit of grace. Realize that the image that you saw in your mind is probably not real, that this thing doesn't exist yet, and that conjuring ideas and world building in that fashion is far more like building a structure than it is like uncovering something. We are one part archaeologists and we are one part, builders. And, maybe one part inventor as well. There's a lot of different things that go on there. Whoa, bug flying by. Ah! oh boy. We'll see if I can keep that in or not. Let me get my sanity back here for a moment. So we are simultaneously coming up with ideas and then having to sift through pieces of, what exists, what doesn't exist, what we've created, what others have created, and figure out in that what we need to create. And then we also have to come up with the blueprints to build whatever, is going to have to happen in order to serve our purposes. There's a lot of different roles there. And often we will find that we deal with one of those roles better than the others. And generally, you'll find that one of those is harder than the others for you. For me, coming up with the ideas is super easy. That's my main skill set. But actually, like inventing the pieces and making it come together and coalesce into something that functions, that's much harder. I actually do pretty well with the other side of it, which is the research and figuring out what works. And I love ideating. Like I love spending time figuring out like how would this culture function? What would they do? How would they live? But I struggle sometimes with actually getting those ideas to come to fruition and be a functional thing. I have a really good friend who's much better at that part. He's far more builder and inventor, and he is a good addition to me. When I don't know what to do with something, I will often reach out to him and be like, okay, so like this is what's happening. How do I make this work? And on that note, if you don't have any art community, if you don't have people to talk to like that, I would encourage you to check out our Discord community, which is linked below. And it's just going to give you access to some other human beings who can hopefully give you a little bit of feedback on your work. It's a small community, but we are working on building it. And the overarching goal is just to have a group of people to run artistic things by. Because most of us, after you get out of high school or college, or if you don't work in an artistic job, it's pretty hard to find artistic people in your life that you can run things by that can help you out with some of your ideas. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check it out below. There's obviously no pressure. There's no financial incentive for me. So it's just it's a good thing. The incentive for me is more people on there means better content for all of us. Better people to take a look at my work and all the work of all the other people. So, but you'll find that it's a struggle, and generally speaking, I think this is the case with most artistic and creative endeavors. We tend to get really excited about them, dive in, and then reality sets in, and reality is often quite harsh because it's a lot easier to come up with the idea for a thing than it is to actually develop the thing itself. And that makes sense. I mean, if you really stop and think about it, it makes a lot of sense. But if you find yourself beating yourself up for, your ideas not coming out correctly on paper the first time, you're going to have to get over that, because that's just not how life works most of the time. Most of the time, you come up with an idea, your first iteration of it is going to be terrible. Your first draft of your story is not going to work. The first videos you put together on YouTube are not going to be great. That's life. And once you accept that, you can begin moving on from it, and you can begin doing things that are more productive, spending your time in a better fashion. It took me a while when I decided that I wanted to put together a YouTube channel to actually do it. And then it was really hard to edit those first couple videos because I felt like these are terrible. And, in a lot of ways, they're not good. But you have to do the not good in order to get to the skill level necessary to do the good things. And I think that's often really hard for people when they start out with art, because usually you get this wave of excitement, and there's a lot of endorphins in the early stage because you do learn things quickly. It's a pretty quick process at the beginning to get like your baseline skills, like learning how to mix a couple colors of paint or learning how to shade something. But pretty quickly you run into your eyes develop, you notice all the things that you don't know how to do, and that becomes overwhelming. And I think the vast majority of people quit art at that point. They enjoy that first initial wave of excitement, and then as things begin to get overwhelming, they just back out because it becomes scary. And I think a lot of people just justify it by convincing themselves like, oh yeah, like I'm not really an artist. Like, look, things got hard. And if you push them on it, often they'll get grumpy. They'll get frustrated with you because if you, as an artist who's been at it for a long time, try to convince somebody that like, well, no, you just need to be more patient or give it more time, that's threatening to their ego and their psyche. It's so much easier as human beings to just go, I'm just not artistic. Like, I just don't have this skill, rather than what I think is actually the reality, which is I'm just not willing to put in the time to develop this skill. It's much easier to other the artists, to sit there and go, well, they're good at this because, they have something special about them. And for some of them that's true, but like the vast majority of artists are good at art because they've put time in. There's no magic. There's no secret sauce. Are people born with talent and they're better than other people? Absolutely. But that is, I think, the minority of artists, and it's absolutely the minority of skilled and professional artists. I don't know of any professional artist I've ever heard talking that says, yeah, I was just born with this skill. Everybody else struggled and I didn't. It's always a story of their hard work and their perseverance. And, in some cases they had jump starts. Maybe my parents were artists, or maybe I had access to some good teachers in my early years, but that doesn't account for everything. It can't. So if you're someone who feels like things are going too slowly for you and you really still want to keep dropping things, but you really still want to work on things, you still want to develop ideas, bring things to life, then I would encourage you to work on your patience, because art requires a ton of patience. But I suppose the point of this episode was primarily to talk about not being precious with your ideas. So sorry for the rambles, they will just naturally happen here. But I think that all of this actually does boil down to that point, now that I'm giving it a second thought. Oop, did the shading on the wrong side there. Indents obviously always have the shading on the opposite side as the exterior of an object, so if the light's coming from here, edge is going to cast a shadow down in there, and then the other shadow on this side. Very much looks like an avocado. I'm not sure I hate it, but it's also not quite what I was going for. So, but yeah, this does come back to the point, which is essentially, if you can teach yourself and give yourself some grace and iterate on ideas and just do the same thing 10 times, and 10 times is really a low number. But if you have a character that you're working on designing and you don't get it right after 3, sorry, but that just makes you normal. I have character designs I've worked on for ages and just have never gotten to where I want them to be. And, when I did my 100 robot series last year, it was probably 20 or 30 robots in before most of them started to look anywhere like what I wanted. But the nice part is, after doing those 100, I did get to a point where some of them did start to look, exactly like I wanted. Some of them started to look good, and it was really, really exciting. It felt very fulfilling. And I think that is just proof that this works, that iterating on your ideas works. So don't be precious with your ideas. Get them down, let them be first drafts, and modify them. Do something that you don't like so that you know what you don't like, and then start working on things that you like more. This design's very strange in comparison to some of the others, but probably not going to work for the region that I'm designing right now, but I really like it in general, and so it might show up somewhere else. We'll see how things go. This sketchbook is going to have a ton of just really crazy meandery things like this, but that's its goal, that's its purpose. And even for me, who's done a lot of this, I still want everything to turn out right the first time. So I'm still reminding myself, I hope that none of these videos come off like I have all of this figured out. Like, I have very little figured out. I'm hopefully just like 2 steps ahead of you, and that's it. And that's, generally speaking, that's what a good teacher is. Most of the stuff that I taught artistically, or even when I was tutoring math, I thought I knew I could kind of handle in some way, but generally I didn't understand it very thoroughly until I was sitting down and teaching other people how to do it. So I don't have all this figured out. A lot of the stuff that I'm telling you, that I'm talking about and describing, are things that I need to remember as well. I need to remember not to be precious with my ideas. That's literally why I have this sketchbook right now, because I was being too precious with my world building sketchbook. So now I have a second world building sketchbook. And this is hopefully going to help me with, I want to draw stuff for my story, but I don't want it to, I haven't worked out this idea yet, so I'm not going to do it in my, kind of professional sketchbook, if you want to call it that. I'm going to do it in the other one. And that will hopefully free me from some of the stress and anxiety and just keep me working. Because that's the big thing, is you got to keep working. As long as you keep going, progress will occur. If you draw one bell tower and it doesn't turn out the way you wanted, and then you walk away, like, that sucks. Please don't do that. But if you draw 30 and you're still not there, and you draw another 30, the chances are you're going to get closer to what you like and what you enjoy. If you get too frustrated, you'll probably eventually start looking up ideas online, or you'll, find inspiration somewhere, which can be such a good thing. And inevitably, like, you will progress. You will move forward. Okay, so this might be my favorite design so far of these. The idea of taking that almost avocado shape as the cutout of the bell and having the bell itself be spherical. I think spheres are often a really lovely way to represent like ancient culture stuff. I think it's probably because in a lot of our mythology and our, world building as humanity, we think of, advanced technology kind of smoothing out all of the lines and all the edges. Though as I'm thinking about this, like the Borg and Transformers are both kind of the opposite side. Like all the Cybertronian tech is very jagged. It's not smooth. But a lot of stuff in sci-fi, when you think about it, is the advanced technology is always smooth and curvilinear. And I think the idea there is probably somewhat taken from elven things, from fantasy. And on the other side, I think it's taken from this idea that you are eliminating waste. So the more technologically advanced you get, we are equating with like psychologically sophisticated as well. Wherein probably in reality it wouldn't be that uncommon to end up with, an advanced technological race that just never smoothed anything and just kept adding stuff on the whole time. Kind of like we see here in our world. So there's a good chance that would actually be how things went. So maybe the Cybertronian and the Borg side of things are actually more accurate. Though I hate to give the Borg credit for anything, because they are probably one of the most terrifying things from my youth. So I'm going to finish out these designs and then probably come back to this one and work on that one a little bit more, since I like that one the most so far. But I think it's also good to just keep working through the ideas, because you never know when something's going to turn out in a way that, is more intriguing or better. These have almost like some Native American vibes to them the more I'm getting them here. So we'll see. That's probably not the culture that I'm going for with Mullane, but it might come back in with something later. And I have a feeling a lot of these designs are going to gonna kind of fit themselves in other places. Even with this sketchbook, which is supposed to be my freeform sketchbook, I am having some thoughts about, do I want to try to isolate each region in here? Right now I'm working in the Plains region of Mullane, but like, what if I wanted to do some designs for the city that's hanging in the volcano? Like, do I just do that on this page here? Probably not. So I don't know. But again, I don't want to confine myself too much, because then I won't do the work. I will get too precious with my ideas and I won't actually accomplish things. And if that too precious with your ideas doesn't make sense to you, all I'm saying is you have to get over being too careful, being risk averse, being afraid of things not turning out well, of representing your ideas poorly. Sometimes you will hear the phrase "kill your darlings," which is you have to be willing to sacrifice the art you're working on right now or the character you've developed for the sake of the story, for the sake of the other thing. And I think that's 100% true. I've had to kill characters in my writing, and I don't like doing it. I like my characters, but that's one of the things that, if you write a character knowing you're going to kill them off, there's probably a human desire to be detached. If you write a character and only at the moment where it occurs you decide, oh goodness, like this character needs to die here, then you were writing them and playing with them as if you were totally invested in them the whole time. And I just can't imagine that would result in a lesser character. I think that would just by its nature give you a character that makes more sense, that is more fleshed out. And I ended up killing a character at the end of my first novel that I didn't intend on. And the way that they're society works, like he could be reincarnated, and that's kind of the initial plan I went with. But the more I'm playing with things, the more I'm like, man, maybe maybe he is reincarnated, but like not in the actual storyline. And he's going to be reincarnated as a child, and so maybe he doesn't play any more role in this novel. And that was not what I anticipated. This character I'd been kind of working with and playing with in my brain for 20 some odd years, and now in the second novel, as I'm working my way through things, like he's dead. And I've also introduced a lot more characters that I didn't plan on introducing. And all of these kind of things just kind of happen if you're not too precious with your ideas. And the second aspect I mentioned, like right at the beginning of this episode, is that you need to get your ideas out of your head. This is kind of in conjunction with not being too precious with your ideas, but it's a little bit different as well, because you need to get used to just getting ideas out onto the paper, whether that's writing, whether that's drawing or painting, because once you get them out onto some visible form, they can be analyzed, they can be understood. You can start to sift through the pieces, figure out what works, what doesn't work, and modify it. This bell tower has kind of been in my mind for over a year now as I've been working on building out the story, but it was amorphous. Now it's kind of taking form, and I can, imagine this space where my characters are encountering it and having to wrap their head around this massive thing. And that just makes the world feel more fleshed out, more interesting. And when I'm writing my chapters, if I know what this structure looks like, not only does that language come in, but I'm better able to get into the minds of my characters and understand how they might be reacting to this, ancient technology, this crazy thing. So I think that it's going to benefit you tremendously in anything you're world building, whether you're working on a novel, a story, a video game, or you're even trying something like a D&D campaign. It's going to be good for you to get the ideas out in some visual form or written form, depending on what your medium is. I need to start doing more stuff like this too, where I actually like get characters, like small versions of the characters involved in those spaces. Yeah, I like this bell is working better for me. I don't think like chains don't make sense. I don't think. Take notes too. And don't worry about spelling. I'm a terrible speller, so it's part of the reason why I do so much via typing, is I am just not a very good speller. I started writing on computers a lot earlier than most people in my generation because my father is a huge nerd, and so like I had my first drawing tablet in like 95, 96 on a computer. It was like some of the first technology that had been built that way. My dad is just a huge nerd. I don't know if the story's true or not, but the rumor is that he took my mom on a date to the arcade when we were growing up, or not when we were growing up, when they were, dating. And I think they saw like the original Star Wars movie in theaters together on a date. So, yeah. And my dad is still a big nerd. He's got an awesome gaming PC. He loves the God of War series. We tried to get him into Elden Ring, and he said that it wasn't for him, that it was too dark. My brother and I tried to be like, yeah, but that's kind of the point. Like, it's not dark for like glorifying evil, in that sense. It's dark in that like the world is broken. Like humanity went against their station. They broke existence, and now you are going to help try to put the pieces back together, which I think is cool. I think that's a nice like redemption story. And yeah, but I could understand at least on a like fundamental level that could be kind of uncomfortable. But I happen to love the game. I am also one of those guys who I have a very easy time detaching lore and environment from a game. I can't do horror content. It's not for me. I get way too freaked out. But like I play most games just for the gameplay. Like the new Monster Hunter game, Monster Hunter Wilds, comes out today when I'm recording this. And hopefully it's good. But they focused a lot more on the story, evidently, for this iteration of the series. And I'm like, I just don't care. Like, story's fine and all. I love story in other aspects of my life, but I play video games primarily for the gameplay. And so if they focus a ton on the story, it's like that doesn't matter. I'm gonna play the end game for hundreds of hours, and that's gonna be devoid of story. I like playing games over and over again, getting to the end point where you know everything about it and you can just kind of enjoy. So I know that's not how it is for a lot of people, but I'm also the guy who doesn't watch TV or movies unless I've seen them before. Which, yes, of course, that's going to create some odd feedback loops because it means that I get very seldom do I get new media in TV and movies. It also means I save a lot of time because you can waste a lot of time watching TV and movies. So I'm going to keep iterating on these guys and playing with them. And I'm not totally satisfied. I think this design, like, we're closer to what I want it to be at this point. But we're still not quite there yet. Yeah, I think that one might be closest. This one's kind of cool, but yeah, the shapes might be getting a little tricky. So we shall see what kind of becomes of it. I wonder if I flip some of these shapes. Like, what if you had an inner triangle? You had a triangle-like shape and then had another that's like that. Maybe that'll work. So, but yeah, the basic point here is try not to be too precious with your ideas and just get them down. Once they're down, even if they feel awkward or you're embarrassed by them or ashamed of them, they're modifiable. And that's the biggest thing, especially with something as large as world building. You want to have the ideas down so that they can be modified, so that you can start working on them and editing them. The same thing has been very true with my writing, and talk to other people in my writing group. It's a good idea to think of your writing, your world building in the same way you might think of a painting, where you get the first layer down, and probably no one's going to ever see that first layer. You're going to cover it with fixing mistakes and tonal corrections, but you kind of have to have your canvas toned so that you can tell whether your lights are light enough and your darks are dark enough. And the same thing I think goes for writing and world building. You just need to get something down because that something gives you context to modify. And yeah, so just try to get your ideas out there. Well, as always, thanks for being here. I would love to hear your thoughts on this topic and if this is something you struggle with or not. And also, what would you like to hear about next as we keep moving through the world building sessions and sketchbooks? Thank you to my patrons who are on the screen right now. If you want to support me on Patreon, that would be amazing. I would very much appreciate it. No pressure, obviously, but if you want to check it out in the description below, feel free to do so. And please check out the Discord, especially if you are in need of an artistic community. We would love to have you, and each person just makes the environment a little bit more rich. Oh, all right. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.